Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, my name is Monica. I like to post anti-MLM, life, and some true crime content here on this channel. In today's video, I am going to be going over a true crime case that has a teensy tiny connection to an MLM. It's not a big one. It's not that the MLM did anything wrong, but the person that did something wrong was part of Amway. So because of that, just as a disclaimer, this video is for, I guess you could say, educational purposes, because this isn't really entertainment and just my opinion. So obviously this is opinion based. And because this is also true crime, I do have to issue a warning on that. The following presentation is intended for mature audiences. It contains graphic descriptions of crime scenes, adult dialogue, and adult language. Viewer discretion is advised. I would also like to add that this particular true crime video is going to be a little heavier than any of the other ones that I have done. There is a lot of talk of abuse, assault, and rape. So if that is something that you cannot handle or watch, I would just click off this video right now, because this is not the video for you to watch. We are going to be talking about the Ken and Barbie killers today. If you have not heard of this, it is very well known in Canada, and the actual names of the people are Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. The reason why they were dubbed the Ken and Barbie killers is because they were very young, they looked to have their life all together, they looked to have the perfect life, and on top of that as well, a lot of people would say that they were a very attractive couple. They were both very attractive. And the one thing that I will say, and I don't know if it's because I went into my research knowing what they did and knowing that this was a disgusting crime and that they are serial killers, so I don't know if it's that my mind was just already biased, but when I was looking at pictures and the home videos that they had, their eyes were just filled, in my opinion, with evil. I mean, the way that they looked at the camera, it's almost like their eyes showed that they were emotionless, and that, just like I just said, that they were just pure evil. But again, maybe it's because I'm going into this knowing that they did something very, very disgusting and very bad, but that's just the feeling that I got when I was watching any of the home videos of them or just looking at any of their pictures. Let's start off with Paul Bernardo's beginnings. He was born on August 27th in 1964 in Scarborough, Canada, to Kenneth and Marilyn Bernardo. It was said that they were pretty well off. They were a middle-class family. They didn't really have any financial troubles, and that they were just your normal family. If you want to take a look at the background of his parents, Kenneth Bernardo kind of had a dysfunctional family and a dysfunctional past, whereas Marilyn Bernardo, she lived a pretty good life. There was no talk of any kind of dysfunctional family. It was just your average happy family. However, in 1974, Kenneth Bernardo would be charged with child molestation. Kenneth had also molested Paul's older sister. Because of this, and also because of Kenneth's abuse, his consistent abuse, Marilyn kind of spiraled out of control, and she was she withdrew from everything, she withdrew from everyone, and it got to the point where she fell into a deep depression, and she would later decide to live in the basement of the home. It would later be said that a lot of people who knew Paul while he was growing up, they said that he was very nice, he was very polite, he was always smiling, and that he was just a really good kid. Now, when he was in high school, he was also known, because he was so attractive, he was known to kind of be a little bit of a ladies' man. He had a few girlfriends in high school, and all of the girlfriends that he had in high school seemed to say that he was very considerate, he was very polite, he was always really great to them. But things would take a little bit of a turn once Paul turned 16. When Paul turned 16, him and his mother, Marilyn, got into quite a heated argument, I could not find what the argument was about, but every source said that it was just a very heated argument. And so they would go on to have this heated argument. While this was going on, Paul's mother, Marilyn, she actually told Paul that Kenneth is not your real father. And she would go on to show him a picture of Paul's real father. You would think at this point that Paul would, because he resented his, now knowing his stepfather, he resented him a lot, and there was obviously some kind of tension. So you would think, finding out this information, that he would almost be relieved that this disgusting man is not actually his father. However, he ended up resenting his mother, Marilyn, even more than Kenneth. And it got to the point where he would start calling his mother inappropriate names like whore, and that she was a slob. And this is when Paul's life and attitude kind of took a turn for the worse. Paul would go on to study at the University of Toronto, and while being at the University of Toronto, he would learn how to pick up some ladies and, just kind of date around and everything of that nature. But a lot of the girls that he dated were saying that they left him because of the abuse. So my assumption, and of course this is just, my assumption, my opinion, I'm assuming that probably after all of that stuff that happened with his mother and finding out that his real father was not Kenneth, I'm assuming that at this point in time he had a little bit of resentment towards women, and I am going to say that that is where all of this kind of behavior came from, because he went from being a really great guy in a relationship to abusive. He would also find out at this point in time that he had a very bad temper, and that he had a dark sexual fantasy desire kind of a thing. And I couldn't find the actual time period, so if any of you guys out there know the time period, I could not find it, but at some point around this time he was in Amway, and it was said that the sales culture affected him in a certain kind of way. And it was also said that, quote, he bought the books and tapes of famous motivational get-rich and famous experts, end quote. So I'm assuming that he was probably trying to be a really successful guy, which who doesn't want to be successful? At the same time, he also was very into reading American Psycho. And so some sources said this, other sources didn't say this, so I don't know how true this is, but it was said that he was reading this book and almost reading it as like a Bible, which, kind of creepy, if you ask me. In May of 1987, Paul would go on to rape and sexually assault a woman right outside of her family home. And because of this, he would be dubbed the Scarsborough Rapist. However, at this point in time, no one knew that he was actually the Scarsborough Rapist. This was just, they knew that there was someone that was on the prowl and that was on the hunt, I guess you can say, but they didn't know that it was actually Paul. After that, he would later go on to sexually assault 3 more women before he met the woman of his dreams, who was Karla Homolka. They met in 1987 at a pet convention, and at the time, he was 23 and Karla was 17. Now that we have entered in Karla Homolka into the story, let's chat a little bit about Karla Homolka before we continue with the story. So she was born on May 4th, 1970 to Dorothy and Carell. I think I'm saying that properly. She was born, she wasn't born in St. Catharines, but that's where she was raised. Her younger sisters were Laura and Tammy. This next part of the story is a little weird, but it was said that when she was much younger, around 7 or 8 years old, that she was playing with one of her friends, and her friend had a pet hamster. And Karla came up with this weird idea to use a pillowcase as a parachute for the hamster. So they tied the hamster to this pillowcase and threw it out the window, and I guess hoped that the hamster would fly. But it did not. The hamster unfortunately passed away, which would, I find that like so just sad and horrible. But it gets worse. Later, after the hamster was buried and everything, then Karla had asked her friend if they could dig up the hamster because Karla wanted to see what a decomposing body looked like. I'm sorry, but a 7 or 8-year-old should not even know. And the thing that I don't understand is that they let her see it. Why? Wouldn't you contact her parents and be like, hey, this is kind of weird. Like, she wants to see what this hamster looks like, and it's been dead for a few weeks already. You need to come get your child and get her some help. When Karla was younger, she was very girly. She was your typical girly girl. But then things kind of took a little bit of a turn when she got into high school. She started wearing a lot of black. She started wearing a lot of black makeup, a lot of, black nails. And basically, in my opinion, just being a goth kid, I feel like a lot of people have gone through this phase. I'm not judging or anything like that, but I feel like a lot of people, as soon as they go to high school, they go through this phase, which, like I said, no judgment. But Karla went through this phase. The only difference with Karla is that she, and it's not funny, but she all of a sudden had this obsession with death, and she had this obsession with the occult, and she started having dark sexual fantasies. So that was Karla in high school. This next part is kind of important to know for a little bit later, but while Karla was in high school, she did lose her virginity, and there's a reason why this is important in the story. But let's move along. She loved animals, apparently, which I find kind of odd that she loves animals when she did that to a hamster when she was much younger, but I mean, that's just my opinion. She would later get a job with a pet center. Now, it was because of this job and because of her interest in animals and pets, she would go to a pet convention, just like I said earlier, in 1987, and she would meet Paul. At this convention, Karla and her friend decided that they were going to go to the restaurant and they were going to have dinner and just kind of hang out. Then walk in Paul and his friend. They decided to come to sit at Karla and her friend's table. And the friends that they were with would later say that it was almost like instant fireworks. It was instant chemistry. The two of them just got along with each other so well, and they just were great together. Well, that very same night, they went up to the hotel room and they slept together that night. This is where they would realize that the both of them had very dark sexual fantasies, which were sadomasochistic. I think I'm saying that properly. I'm so sorry if I'm not. But they would almost role play where he was the master and Karla was his slave. Moving along to their relationship and more of their time together. So Paul would actually be very abusive towards Karla. However, the only difference this time around is that Karla actually liked it. She actually encouraged it. She was totally fine with it, which, I mean, to each their own, I guess. But I mean, I'd run for the hills in that situation. But she was totally fine with it. And Paul would also ask her, hey, I'm actually really curious as to how this conversation went because this is not a normal conversation that you have. But Paul would ask Karla if she was okay with him being a rapist. And Karla said that it was fine. And she encouraged that and enabled it. Within 2 months of them meeting and sleeping together and dating and all of that kind of stuff, they were engaged. And Paul was at the time sexually assaulting many women in the Scarsboro area. Then in 1987, right before Christmas, there was a victim who got away from Paul and was able to talk to the police, and they were able to come up with a composite sketch of Paul. They decided not to release this sketch right away, and now remember, this happened in 1987. They would release this sketch in May of 1999, and that's when a lot of Paul's and Karla's friends would see the composite sketch and say, and call the police and say, hey, this is our friend. I mean, it looks exactly like him. When that did happen, Paul was questioned by the police. However, he was very charismatic, very charming, very manipulative, just like every other male serial killer that I have ever looked into or ever read about. And he was somehow able to get away with it. But before he got away with it, the police officers had asked him, hey, can we take some DNA samples? And I believe it was blood and saliva samples that they got. Now, remember, this is back in the 90s. They didn't have the same technology that we have today. So it took quite a little bit of time for them to be able to get the DNA tested and get it back and everything of that nature. So Paul was able to charm his way out of this questioning and basically walked free. At this point in time, this is when Karla and Paul would decide to move to St. Catharines, and they would move in with Karla's family. Karla's family loved Paul. They loved him. They thought he was amazing. They thought he was great for Karla. And Tammy, Karla's younger sister, would end up liking him as an older brother. She looked up to him like an older brother. She admired him like an older brother. And there's a reason why I'm telling you this, because of what happens next. Tammy was 15 years old at this time. And Paul had become, I would say he became obsessed with Tammy, and it was because she was a virgin. This is why I said it was important to know about Karla's past, because this is where it's going to come into play. Tammy was a virgin, and Karla knew that the one thing she could not give Paul was Karla's virginity. But she could give him Tammy's virginity. This is where it starts to get fucked up, okay? This is where it starts to get really disgusting, and I was kind of not 100% sure if I even wanted to talk about this crime, but once I found out the outcome, I knew that I needed to talk about it. Going back to the story. Because Paul was so obsessed with Tammy, Karla would start to leave blinds open so that Paul could follow his stepfather's footsteps and be a peeping Tom and spy on little Tammy and watch her through the windows and be a complete and total piece of shit creep. And Karla allowed it. So she is just as big of a disgusting human being, but let's keep going. This was a time where Karla was actually working at the vet's office. So in 1990, when she worked at the vet clinic, she stole some substances from the vet clinic. There were certain things that she would later use to lace people's food and drinks with, and also an anesthesia that they use for animals. However, the difference with the anesthesia when they use it at the office is it is given in proper amounts, and it is also monitored. After she stole all of these things from the vet clinic, she decided that she was going to lace Tammy's food because she wanted to offer Tammy to Paul, and so that Paul would be able to take Tammy's virginity. However, after she had the food that Karla had laced, Tammy woke up from, I guess she had passed out, but Tammy had woken up, and that is when they decided that they can't do this now. They have to try again a different time. So let's fast forward to December 23rd. They decided to try this yet again. Paul was videotaping because they were having a Christmas dinner with their family, and Paul was videotaping all of the family interactions and the dinner and all of that kind of, like the old home videos that I'm sure anyone who is my age and older has in their house, maybe even the younger. And So he was recording all of the family and everything like that. Well, they somehow convinced Tammy to stay up with them and watch a movie. And also, they gave her some drinks. They were all drinking. And Karla would again lace her sister's drink. On top of that as well, remember when I was talking about the anesthesia that they were using? I believe it was called halothane. And that is what she put it on like a rag. And every time that Tammy would kind of like come to, she would put the rag over her so that she would kind of pass back out. But the problem was, and mind you, they videotaped the entire thing. They videotaped the rape, the assault, everything. Everything was on camera, along with the family dinner that they just had. So this is just, it's so sick and twisted. But let's keep going. So all of this started happening, and Tammy started to come to again. At this point in time, she started to vomit, and she actually choked on her own vomit. So they, instead of calling 911 right away, or I don't know if it's 911 in Canada, but it's 911 here in the US. And they decided that they're going to dress her first. They're going to clean her up first so that when the ambulance comes, there's no evidence of any kind of foul play. However, unfortunately, they took Tammy to the hospital, and unfortunately, Tammy passed away. Tammy had chemical burns on her face from the halothane, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, that Karla was using in order to kind of make her pass out again and again. But no one questioned this because Karla and Paul would tell everyone that we were trying to resuscitate her, so that's where that came from. After this happened, they decided that they were going to move out of her parents' home and they were going to get their own place. At this point in time, Karla was kind of complaining about her dad and how her dad couldn't get over Tammy's death, and which, I mean, how can you possibly complain about that? This was right after it happened. So, of course, he's going to mourn his daughter's death. Anyway. So all of this was happening, and her father was telling her that, hey, I can't pay for your wedding. I think that you should hold off on your wedding. I think that, you know, you should mourn your sister's death and that kind of a thing, which I agree. I think that they should have waited, but Karla did not like this response, and she decided they were going to get married anyway. The crazy part surrounding this is that Karla had no regrets about Tammy. She went on with her life. Her and Paul lived this normal, regular, average life after this happened, which I find just so, I can't wrap my head around it. And this is the time where they would start filming themselves while they were having sex with one another. And also I found a few things that said this, where Karla would actually dress up in Tammy's old clothes and act like Tammy on camera for Paul. I don't know. That's like a whole nother realm of what the that I can't wrap my head around. But no one had connected any of these crimes to Paul and Karla. But the crazy part is that they left Scarborough, right? When they left Scarborough and when they moved to St. Catharines, all of the rapes stopped in Scarborough. And then once they moved to St. Catharines, all of the rapes and all of the assaults started again in St. Catharines. But no one put two and two together. And I mean, I can understand why, if you're looking from the outside. I mean, they hit it pretty well. They did. And so I can understand. And also, you got to think about it too, is that a lot of people, they love these two. So they could never see them doing something like this. Now we're going to move on to some more victims. This particular one, Jane Doe, I was reading somewhere, I forget the exact wording of the article, but they were saying something along the lines of they can't disclose the name of Jane Doe because of some kind of confidentiality thing with the public. I don't know exactly what it was, but so we don't know what her name is. Her name is going to be Jane Doe. And this was someone that Karla worked with. So on June 7th, Karla found their next victim, which was Jane Doe. And this is someone that she worked with, just like I just said. And Karla would say that this was a wedding gift for Paul. I cannot wrap my head around this. I cannot. What they ended up doing was they ended up, of course, lacing her drink or her food, and she passed out. They filmed the rape and the sexual assault, and Jane Doe woke up and did not know that anything happened to her. She just woke up and she went on her merry way. And that was that. On June 15th of 1991, Paul would pick up his next victim. Her name was Leslie Mahaffey. She was 14 years old at the time, and it was on June 24th that Leslie went to I believe it was a funeral for one of her friends who had passed away, and her other friends, they were up really late that night, and she was coming home at around 2 o'clock in the morning. And it said that the reason why she couldn't get into her house, the doors were locked, she couldn't get into the house because she went past her curfew, and that her parents locked her out as like punishment, I guess you can say. Leslie walked to a payphone and she was going to call her friend to ask her if she can stay with her because she can't get into her house. Her friend said no, but they were on the phone for quite a number of minutes and they were just talking. That's when Leslie decided that she was going to walk back to her home and she was going to try to wake up her parents just to, try to let her back into the house. While she was walking home, Paul spotted Leslie, and he lured her into the car by asking her if she wanted a cigarette, and what he ended up doing was he ended up putting his sweater over her and as a blindfold and stuffed her in the back of the car. For the next 24 hours, Paul and Karla would torture, assault, rape, videotape the whole entire thing of Leslie, and they murdered her. The only thing is that the murder was not caught on camera, so there is conflicting information on how she was murdered. The problem with Paul and Karla is, obviously, they were both against each other when all this stuff happened. Paul admitted to all of the assault and the abuse and the rape, but he never admitted to the actual murder itself. Whereas Karla was saying that he strangled all of these women, all of these girls, because some of them were so young, with his own, that he did it and she didn't have anything to do with it, that he did that. So I don't know. It wasn't caught on camera. We don't know what actually happened to these girls. Leslie's body would be moved into the basement, and the very same day, they would have their family come over, Karla and Paul. They would have their family come over and they would all have a dinner, family dinner, above the basement where Leslie's body was just laying. What they would end up doing is they would end up grabbing a saw and dismembering Leslie's body and then encasing her body in concrete. They would then throw the concrete into Lake Gibson, and people would end up finding it. They got married on June 29th in 1991, and it was a super extravagant wedding. They had a horse-drawn carriage, and on the same day of their wedding is when a fisherman would find Leslie's body in the concrete, and they would end up finding more concrete blocks from the actual lake itself as well. And they were able to determine that it was a female body and that she could be anywhere between the ages of 14 and 25, that age range. So let's remember Jane Doe from just a little bit ago. Well, this is Jane Doe part 2. That sounds so terrible. Jane Doe came over again after work with her and Karla, and this was in August of 1991. The same thing happened, the filming, the assault, except this time around, Jane Doe actually stopped breathing, just like how Tammy did, Karla's sister. But this time around, they were able to resuscitate her. They actually let her go. She had no idea that any of this happened to her. She ended up just waking up, and they said that she passed out, and all of a sudden she stopped breathing, so they had to resuscitate her. And I can't imagine not knowing that this happened and then later finding out that this actually happened to you, and you have to relive those moments. Well, not necessarily relive, just not even know that this happened to you, and then you have to find out about it later. I cannot imagine. Okay, let's move along. So Kristen French would be the next victim of Paul and Karla. On April 16th of 1992, Kristen would be walking on her way home from school. And this was very routine for her. She was always walking at the same time. She was always expected home at the same exact time. And Paul and Karla would actually stop and ask her for directions. Karla even had a map out in front of her, and what ended up happening was they were talking to Kristen, asking for directions, and Paul came up behind her and, of course, blindfolded her and put her in the back. The weird part is that when this happened, there were actually witnesses that saw this whole entire thing happen. When they put out the missing persons report, all of these witnesses came forward and talked about what they saw, who they saw, what kind of car. And the problem was the one woman who came forward and talked about what she saw. She wasn't very well versed in the automotive industry, so she said that she saw a beige Camaro when really it was a Nissan. So they had this beige Camaro plastered all over every single billboard. And this hindered the investigation because everyone was looking for a beige Camaro. They weren't looking for the car that Paul actually drove, which was a Nissan. Again, at this point in time, nobody suspected Paul or Karla of any of these crimes. They ended up keeping Kristen for 3 days. They did the same thing to her as they did all the other victims. And Kristen was actually trying to cooperate because she was hoping that they would let her go. Again, when she was murdered on April 19th, they did not put it on tape, so no one knows the actual way that she died. However, what they ended up doing was they left her body in the exact same spot where she was murdered. And Paul and Karla would go over to Karla's family's house to have an Easter dinner. And then once they came back from that Easter dinner, they washed Kristen's body. They cut off all of her hair. And I was seeing that later on, Karla was saying that she did this so that they wouldn't really be able to recognize who Kristen was. But I mean, her face is the same. So anyway, they dumped her body in a ditch not too far from where Leslie Mahaffey, the other victim that I was talking about, was buried. After all of this happened, Karla would go on to talk about how Paul was very abusive. And there is one picture which I will not show because it is kind of graphic. You can look it up yourself. It's also been it's all over the internet. But Paula was beaten with a flashlight. So she had these two just really severely just bad black eyes, and she had bruises all over her body. Her family somehow convinced her to leave Paul and come stay with them. And then they would go to the police, then they would go to the hospital, make sure that she was okay. And this was in January of 1993. So the police started to connect the dots just a little bit to Paul and Karla. They started seeing certain things that could put them as the serial killers. This is where it gets a little fuzzy, and I'm not sure what the actual proper story is because I've read and seen and heard multiple different things. So there were some people that said that at this point in time the police already got the DNA back and they were able to link both of them back to these crimes. There was also talk that they were kind of able to link them back, but they congratulations to law enforcement on this because they did a really good job with this. So Karla came in and she thought she was going to be questioned about domestic violence because of what had happened to her. However, when they brought her in for questioning, The two detectives who were on the case for Leslie and Kristen and all of the other rapes that had happened in Scarsboro and just everything that was going on that these two did, these two detectives were very well known. They were plastered all over the news. They were plastered all over every single, news and everything like that. They brought these two detectives in when they were questioning Karla. Well, Karla got a little nervous. After that, Karla would go to her uncle and confess, not everything, but some things to her uncle. And she would go on to say that even though she was involved in these murders, that she was forced to do it. She was manipulated to do it. She was terrified of Paul. Paul made her do it, blah, 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 right? So Karla would get a lawyer, and the lawyer would be able to somehow strike up a deal that said she was able to not get away with it, because she didn't get away with it, but they were able to write out a deal where she would get 2 10-year sentences to serve at the same time, and then another 2 years to serve because of the involvement of Karla with her sister Tammy's death, and the possibility of parole after 3 years in exchange for her testimony against Paul. They were also, it's been said that they were also linked, they weren't charged with it, but they were also linked to dozens of other rapes that happened in the Scarsboro area, which honestly, even though they weren't convicted of those specific situations, I would not be surprised if they were linked to it. Anyway, so after that deal, in February of 1993, Paul was arrested for the murders. They found a journal, because they actually had a search warrant for the house and everything like that, and they found a journal where Paul was writing in it, and he was talking about everything that he did to these girls and these women, and he talked about it. It was just disgusting. And so anyway, they found that journal, and then they were not able to find the tapes until a few years later, right before Paul's trial. At this point, Karla didn't even have to testify anymore, because they had the tapes, they had all of that they could just easily convict Paul right away. But what they didn't know on these tapes is that Karla, who played the victim, was actually not a victim. She played just as much as a role in these crimes as Paul did, and that she had way more involvement that she let on in the beginning. After this was talked about, it ended up coming out into the public because her plea deal wasn't discussed at all. It was not allowed to be discussed in the media or anything like that, because law enforcement wanted Paul to have a fair trial and to not have anything skewed or anything like that. So they didn't talk about the plea deal. Well, later on, this plea deal would come to be known as the deal with the devil, because she served her sentences and she's actually out right now. But before we go over that, let's go over what ended up happening. Paul was convicted of multiple sexual assault charges. He was also charged with 2 first-degree murder charges and 2 counts of aggravated assault. He got a life sentence, which I believe in Canada is 20 years. But after that, he was dubbed as a dangerous offender, and he would spend his entire life behind bars. He was meant to have a parole hearing in October of 2018, I believe it was. However, he was caught with a shank in prison, and they moved his hearing. Anything really came of that. He didn't get parole. He's still behind bars and all of that. The crazy part that I found out is that he got engaged while he was in prison, and apparently he was supposed to get married to this person once he got out on parole. It's been said that he's had fans, he's had groupies, and that kind of a deal, with which I kind of want to do a video on that, but my whole thing is that because a lot of serial killers tend to have fans. They tend to have these people that are just like infatuated with these people for what they did. Even though it's so violent and disgusting, these people are just like madly in love with them. I know that there's a specific term for that, and I forget what it is. I will have to look it up, but there's a specific term for it for people who are actually attracted to people that commit these violent crimes. But anyway, let's move on to Karla's life after prison. She is out walking free. She is married with 3 children. She now lives in Quebec, and there was a point in time where she was volunteering around children in a school. I was also able to find that she goes by the name Leanne or Emily Boradelais. I am not very good with my French, so I'm so sorry. I will put that name on the screen. I'm so sorry that I said it wrong. I know I butchered it. And I'm not sure why the name has been used interchangeably. I know that she goes by Leanne, but I don't know why Emily was thrown into the mix. But anyway, I couldn't find information on that. But she has changed her name, which I can see why. When she was released from prison, none of her family was there waiting for her. They told reporters that they would not be waiting for her, which I can see why they would not be waiting for her. And the person that she married was actually her lawyer's brother, which I found very interesting. They moved, when she got out of prison, they moved to Costa Rica before returning back to Quebec, which I also found interesting. So I guess they were trying to kind of let everything dwindle before she came back to Canada. However, people don't let her live that down. There have been signs in her neighborhood saying, "Don't ever forget the victims," which I think that she should be constantly reminded of what she did. She is a disgusting human being, and if she ever watches this, I hope that she knows that she is a disgusting human being. And I don't think that she did enough time behind bars. I don't. I really, truly don't. Because for what she did, that plea deal was such BS. And I know that they were trying to get Paul on all these charges, and that was the only way that they could do it. But I really feel like they should have done just a little more digging so that they could put the both of them behind bars, because Karla's living a normal life. She has children. She's married. She was somehow able to volunteer at a school. They're supposed to do background checks, and apparently they did one, and they knew that she was Karla Homolka, but they still let her volunteer when they know what she did to these young girls. I don't know. The whole thing is really messed up. And I actually saw that there is a video or a movie that's called Karla, and I really want to watch it because I want to see how they portrayed her and everything of that nature. I'm just curious to see how they made that movie. But I think Karla did not do the proper time. I think she got away with it. And the fact that she gets so pissed off when reporters ask her questions or when they follow her around, did you not think that was going to happen when you got out of prison and you live a normal life? And her eyes, like all the pictures and videos that I've seen online, her eyes still look evil. They still look dead to me. Like she just has death in her eyes, and she's just evil. And I don't know if her kids know about her past. I don't know if she will ever tell them. I'm sure they will find out because it's not that hard to look up. And especially if people know that they're the children of her, I'm pretty sure someone will probably say something. I hope that the kids grow up a normal, regular life, and I hope that they are good people. And I just hope that I don't even know what else to say on this. But with that being said, I do want to take a moment of silence, or just a quick moment to remember the victims that they were convicted of murdering, and just the disgusting things that they did. Okay, everyone. If you have watched up to here, thank you so much for watching, and let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Have you heard of this case? Have you never heard of this case before? Do you think that Karla got off real easy? I mean, I can't see someone saying anything other than she did get off easy, but again, that's my opinion. Maybe someone else has a different way of thinking about this case, but if you have watched up to here, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit like, even though this is a really terrible topic, but you know, it helps me in the algorithm, obviously. Make sure to also hit subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. This is Monica reporting to you live from a highway. Bye.